Zorkin, the galaxy's mightiest warrior, stood on the battlefield with his enormous weapon in hand. His muscles were like steel, and his eyes burned with the fire of a conqueror. For years, he had destroyed planets, wiped out armies, and defeated countless enemies. No one had ever come close to defeating him. But today, something felt different. A strange energy hung in the air, thick with anticipation. His usual confidence was shadowed by a feeling he couldn't shake off. He had heard whispers about this human, an earthling who had somehow made his way to this battlefield. Zorkin had laughed at first. A human, the weakest species in the galaxy, known for their fragile bodies and limited strength. It seemed almost laughable to think that this human could pose any real threat to him. The human appeared from the smoke of the ruined battlefield, stepping forward slowly. His face was hard, determined, but his body looked so small and fragile compared to Zorkin's towering form. The crowd of soldiers, most of whom had feared Zorkin for years, watched in silence. They were curious, too. What could this human possibly do? The warrior raised his weapon high, ready to strike, expecting the human to bow down or run in fear. But instead, the human stood still, looking directly at Zorkin, as if challenging him. Zorkin smirked and lowered his weapon. "You are foolish to stand before me," he growled in his deep, commanding voice. The human did not respond. Instead, he clenched his fists and took a step forward, as if ready for the fight of his life. The audience gasped. How could he be so bold? Was he really ready to face the galaxy's mightiest warrior? Without another word, Zorkin charged. His speed was incredible, his strength unmatched. He swung his weapon with the force of 100 storms, aiming to crush the human in one blow. But to Zorkin's shock, the human dodged. It wasn't just that the human moved fast, it was something else. There was a precision to his movements, a kind of skill that Zorkin had never seen before. The warrior's eyes narrowed as he quickly adjusted his stance, spinning around to strike again. The human, though smaller and seemingly weaker, managed to stay one step ahead. Zorkin had seen many opponents, but none had ever moved like this. Each time Zorkin struck, the human was already gone, slipping through his grasp with uncanny agility. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The human should have been crushed by now. Zorkin roared in frustration and increased his speed, the ground shaking with each step. But the human was still there, darting from side to side, never staying in one place for too long. Zorkin's attacks were powerful, but they were slow compared to the human's nimble movements. He realized that this human wasn't just fast, he was smart. Every time Zorkin swung, the human didn't just dodge. He seemed to be predicting the moves, staying ahead of the game. For the first time in years, Zorkin felt a sense of uncertainty. This human wasn't like the others. The battle was not going the way he expected. He had never met an opponent who could read him so easily. He struck again, but this time, the human didn't dodge. Instead, the human ducked low and delivered a quick strike to Zorkin's side. The blow wasn't enough to defeat him, but it sent a shockwave through his body. Zorkin stumbled back, surprised by the strength in that single punch. This was no ordinary human. For a moment, the warrior paused, trying to catch his breath. The human took this opportunity to charge, running straight toward Zorkin with a fierce look in his eyes. Zorkin was ready. He brought his weapon down in a mighty arc, expecting to crush the human with the force of his strike. But once again, the human was too fast. With a surprising leap, the human rolled under the weapon, coming up on Zorkin's other side. Zorkin's eyes widened as the human, now standing just behind him, delivered a quick, sharp blow to his back. Zorkin roared in pain. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was enough to remind him that this fight wasn't as easy as he had thought. He spun around, his fury growing. The human's strikes were fast and unpredictable, each one landing with precision. For the first time in years, Zorkin felt something he had never felt before: doubt. The human wasn't just fast. He wasn't just skilled. There was something more, Something about the way he fought made Zorkin feel like he was up against a force he couldn't understand. Zorkin's mind raced. How was this possible? How could a human, with their weak bodies and limited abilities, be so powerful? It didn't make sense. With a roar of frustration, Zorkin lunged forward again, swinging his weapon with all his might. But the human was already gone, slipping into the shadows of the battlefield, using the terrain to his advantage. Zorkin's frustration grew, and his arrogance began to fade. This fight wasn't over, but it was starting to feel like a fight he might not win. As Zorkin searched for the human, he realized something that chilled him to the core. The human wasn't afraid. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to win. The realization hit Zorkin like a wave. He had spent his entire life conquering worlds, defeating powerful foes, but never once had he encountered an opponent who wasn't afraid of him. The human didn't fear him. In fact, the human seemed to be enjoying the battle. He was focused, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to win. And Zorkin was starting to feel something he had never felt before. He was starting to feel afraid. For the first time in his life, Zorkin wasn't sure he was going to win. And that thought scared him more than any enemy he had ever faced. Zorkin's mind raced as he scanned the battlefield, looking for any sign of the human. His heart pounded with a mix of frustration and confusion. The human had been elusive, moving too fast, too unpredictably. Zorkin had fought many enemies in his time, but none had ever made him feel so vulnerable. His body ached from the human's strikes, and his confidence, usually unshakable, was beginning to crack. Suddenly, a loud noise snapped him out of his thoughts. The human had appeared again, this time on a ridge, standing tall as if waiting for Zorkin to make his move. The warrior's eyes narrowed. It was clear now that the human was no ordinary opponent. Every time Zorkin thought he had the upper hand, the human somehow turned the tables. And Zorkin was getting tired of being caught off guard. Without warning, the human sprang into action, rushing toward Zorkin with a speed that left the warrior barely any time to react. Zorkin raised his weapon to strike, but before he could bring it down, the human slid beneath him, fast as lightning. The warrior barely had a chance to comprehend what was happening before he felt a sharp pain in his side. The human had struck him, landing a clean blow just above his ribs. Zorkin staggered backward, his breath catching in his throat. This time, it was Zorkin's turn to feel the sting of surprise. The human hadn't just hit him. He had attacked with precision, targeting a weak spot that Zorkin hadn't even realized was vulnerable. He could feel the blood starting to seep through his armor. Anger flared in his chest as he turned to face his opponent, but there was no time to process the pain. The human was already moving again, quick and relentless. Zorkin roared in charge, hoping to catch the human off guard, but the human was gone again, darting to the side in an unpredictable zigzag pattern. The warrior's massive frame struggled to keep up. His strikes were wide and heavy, but the human was faster, weaving through them with ease. Zorkin growled in frustration, trying to read the human's movements, but it was like trying to catch smoke. Every time he thought he had the human cornered, he slipped away, almost mocking him. Then, the human did something that completely threw Zorkin off. Instead of running, the human stopped suddenly, turned, and faced him head-on. For a moment, the warrior hesitated, unsure of what was happening. The human was standing still, almost as if he was inviting Zorkin to come closer. His fists were clenched, his body coiled like a spring. There was something different in the human's eyes, something fierce, something determined. Zorkin's instincts screamed at him to attack, but there was something in the air that made him hesitate. The human didn't look afraid. In fact, he looked confident, and for the first time, Zorkin felt a flicker of doubt. He took a step forward, slowly, then another. The human didn't move, didn't flinch. Zorkin felt the tension building between them, thick as a storm cloud waiting to burst. In a blur of motion, the human sprang into action once again. But this time, there was a difference. He didn't simply dodge or weave. He came straight at Zorkin, his fists flying. Zorkin tried to block, but the human's strikes were lightning fast, landing blow after blow on the warrior's chest and arms. It wasn't the power that surprised Zorkin, but the speed and precision. The human wasn't fighting like a desperate man. He was fighting with purpose. Each strike seemed to be part of some larger plan, a plan that Zorkin could not yet comprehend. Zorkin staggered back, unable to keep up with the barrage of attacks. He raised his weapon, ready to strike with all his might, but the human ducked low and kicked out, knocking the weapon from Zorkin's hands. The warrior's eyes widened in disbelief. The weapon was his pride, his strength. Without it, he felt vulnerable. The human wasn't finished. He charged again, and this time, Zorkin had no choice but to fight back with everything he had. The warrior swung a fist at the human, but the human was already there, sliding beneath his arm and delivering another blow, this time to Zorkin's leg. The warrior grunted in pain, feeling the sharp sting of the attack, but he didn't have time to recover. The human's speed was relentless, and Zorkin was starting to feel the weight of every blow. With each strike, Zorkin could feel his confidence slipping away. He had always prided himself on his power, his strength, his invincibility. But this human was showing him that there was more to strength than just brute force. The human's attacks weren't wild. They were calculated. Each strike seemed to have a purpose. Each movement was deliberate. Zorkin couldn't understand it. How could someone so small, so weak, fight like this? His mind raced. The human wasn't supposed to be like this. He was supposed to be weak, to be afraid. But instead, he was standing tall, fighting like a warrior. And with every passing moment, he was wearing Zorkin down. The warrior's pride was beginning to break, and the doubt he had felt earlier now gnawed at him, eating away at his confidence. Zorkin took a step back, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. He had underestimated this human, and it was beginning to cost him. His body ached from the blows, his thoughts clouded with frustration. The human was no longer just an opponent. He had become a challenge, one that Zorkin was struggling to meet. The warrior clenched his fists, refusing to back down. But in that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle had already begun to slip away from him. And for the first time in his life, Zorkin wasn't sure if he could win. Zorkin stood there, breathing heavily, trying to shake off the fatigue that had begun to creep into his body. The pain from the human strikes still throbbed in his chest and legs, but it was the confusion that bothered him the most. He had fought countless warriors, some stronger, some faster, but none like this. None had made him feel this uncertain. The human, so small and seemingly fragile, had outwitted him at every turn, and now, Zorkin couldn't understand why. The human was standing a few feet away, watching him carefully. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. His stance was calm, almost relaxed, despite the battle they had just fought. Zorkin tried to steady his breathing, focusing on the task at hand. He needed to find a way to finish this. He couldn't let this human get the better of him. But then, something happened. The human did not charge. He did not taunt or make a move to attack again. He stood there, his gaze fixed on Zorkin, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Zorkin narrowed his eyes. Was the human trying to wear him down with this silence, or was he planning something else? He couldn't tell. Zorkin took a step forward, his heavy boots thudding against the ground. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his hand, as if signaling for a pause. For a moment, Zorkin hesitated. The warrior's instincts screamed at him to strike before the human could take advantage of this strange calm. But there was something in the air, something that made him pause. "What's your name?" the human asked, his voice calm, almost curious. Zorkin blinked in surprise. He had been in countless battles, fought against enemies from all across the galaxy, but never had any of them asked him for his name. It was an unusual question, one that Zorkin wasn't sure how to answer. He had always been known as Zorkin, the mighty conqueror, the warrior who could defeat anyone. His name alone struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. But now, facing this human, it felt meaningless. Zorkin, the warrior, growled, his voice filled with both pride and confusion. "And you are." The human smiled, but there was no arrogance in it, only a quiet, knowing look. "I'm just a man," he replied. "A human from Earth." Earth. Zorkin echoed, the word foreign to him. He had heard of many planets, many species, but Earth was never mentioned among them. It was a place of no consequence, a small, insignificant world. Yet here was a human standing before him, having fought him to a standstill. There had to be more to this than mere chance. The human seemed to sense Zorkin's confusion. "You've never heard of Earth?" he asked, his voice almost gentle now. Zorkin shook his head. "What makes you so strong?" he demanded. "You are nothing like any other human I've encountered." The human paused for a moment, his expression softening. "I wasn't always like this," he said quietly. "I wasn't always strong. I've had to fight for everything I have. My strength comes from the will to survive, the need to protect the ones I love. You see, back on Earth, we're not the strongest. We don't have your power or your technology. But we have something else. We have the ability to push through, to never give up, no matter the odds." Zorkin's mind whirled as he listened. This was not what he had expected. He had assumed that strength was about power, about physical might. But this human was talking about something different, something Zorkin had never considered. The warrior had never needed to fight for survival in the way the human described. His life had been one of conquest, of domination. He had always been the one taking, the one destroying. But now, listening to the human, Zorkin realized something. This human wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for something greater. "I've fought wars, lost battles, survived hunger, and lost friends," the human continued, his voice steady. "Every time I lost, I got back up. That's what makes me strong. Not power, not weapons, but the will to keep going, no matter what." Zorkin was silent, processing the human's words. He had never known a life like that, never understood what it meant to fight for something beyond himself. He had always been the one to take, to conquer. The idea of fighting for others, of fighting to protect, was foreign to him. And yet, in the human's words, Zorkin felt something stir within him, a recognition that he had never felt before. "You fight for the ones you love," Zorkin muttered, more to himself than to the human. "But what if you lose? What if you can't protect them?" The human's expression softened, but there was no sadness in his eyes, only understanding. "Then you fight harder," he said simply. "Because that's what we do. We fight for the ones we care about. And we never stop, no matter how many times we fall." Zorkin's heart hammered in his chest, and for the first time, he felt something close to fear. Not of the human strength, but of the realization that he had been living his life wrong. He had always thought that power was everything, that conquering and dominating was the true measure of strength. But this human showed him that there was something more, something he had never considered. The warrior stepped back, his mind racing. He had spent so many years fighting for himself, for glory, for control. But now, in the face of this human, Zorkin began to question everything he had believed in. Was power truly the only thing that mattered? Or was there a deeper strength, a strength that came from within, from the heart? The human smiled softly. "You don't have to believe me, Zorkin, but I can promise you this. There's more to strength than just power. And if you're willing to learn, I can show you." Zorkin felt a strange chill run through him. He had always been the teacher, the one showing others what true strength was. But now, here was a human, a mere human, offering to teach him. And for the first time in his life, Zorkin felt as if he was the one who needed to learn. Zorkin stood frozen, his mind swirling with confusion and doubt. The words of the human echoed in his ears, the simple yet profound idea that strength wasn't just about power or domination. It was about something deeper, something Zorkin had never considered. For a moment, the warrior couldn't even look the human in the eye. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like a giant, invincible wall suddenly cracked by a single thought. The human had made him question everything he had lived for. The human, sensing Zorkin's hesitation, didn't push him further. He stood silently, waiting, as if giving the warrior time to process. But Zorkin knew he couldn't ignore the truth. It gnawed at him, tugging at the edges of his consciousness. This human, who was so much smaller, so much weaker by all physical standards, had something that Zorkin lacked. A strength of spirit, a resolve that went beyond the simple might of muscles and weapons. Zorkin's fists clenched. He had spent his life conquering planets, defeating armies, and leaving nothing but destruction in his wake. He was known across the galaxy as the mightiest of warriors, but now, in the face of this human, all of that seemed empty. What was the point of all the destruction, the bloodshed, if it didn't protect anything? If it didn't stand for something greater than oneself? The human took a slow step forward, breaking Zorkin's thoughts. He wasn't threatening or pushing for a fight. He was simply offering a chance to understand. "You can still change, Zorkin," the human said softly. "It's never too late." Zorkin's mind raced. Could he change? Could he, the mighty conqueror, the undefeated warrior, find something more than his endless cycle of violence and war? He had never considered the idea of change before. To him, strength had always meant destruction, dominance. But the human's words had planted a seed, a question that refused to be ignored. For the first time in years, Zorkin looked at his life through a different lens. He thought about the planets he had destroyed, the civilizations he had wiped out without a second thought. What had any of it truly accomplished? He had gained power, wealth, respect, but at what cost? The fear in the eyes of those he had conquered had never brought him peace. The endless victories had left him empty, hollow. He had always been searching for something, but he hadn't known what it was. "I don't know how to fight like you," Zorkin muttered, his voice low, filled with frustration. "I've never fought for anything except power. For myself." The human nodded slowly, as if he understood. "Then it's time to fight for something else," he said. "Maybe for the people you've hurt, or for a future where you don't have to destroy to feel powerful." Zorkin shook his head, his mind still struggling to accept the possibility. "I don't know if I can change," he whispered, the doubt creeping in again. "I've been this way for so long." "You don't have to change overnight," the human said, his voice steady. "But it starts with realizing that there's more to strength than fighting. It's about protecting, about standing up for something worth fighting for." The words hit Zorkin like a blow. Protecting. Standing up for something. The warrior had never considered these concepts. To him, strength had always meant crushing enemies, conquering worlds. But now, the idea of standing for something, of fighting for something greater than himself, was beginning to feel like a possibility. The human stepped back, sensing that Zorkin needed space. He had said his piece, and now it was up to the warrior to decide whether to accept it. Zorkin was left alone with his thoughts, standing in the middle of the battlefield where everything had begun. For a long time, Zorkin didn't move. The world around him seemed to fade, the sounds of battle distant and muffled. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart and the echo of the human's words in his mind. Could he change? Could he learn to fight for something other than power? The thought terrified him, but it also stirred something deep inside, a longing for something more than the endless cycle of destruction he had known. For the first time in his life, Zorkin wasn't sure if victory meant crushing his opponent. For the first time, he wasn't sure if his strength lay in his ability to destroy. He looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of the stars above him. His hands, still stained with the blood of countless enemies, trembled. He had built his life on the belief that power was everything. But the human had shown him something else. Maybe there was a different way. Maybe he could still be strong, but in a way he had never imagined. Zorkin's eyes narrowed as he made a decision. He would not let this human, this strange and powerful being, defeat him with words alone. No, Zorkin would fight. But he would fight for something more. He would fight to understand what true strength really meant. The human watched him quietly, waiting for what would come next. Zorkin took a deep breath, his body still aching from their previous battle. But this time, the pain didn't matter. He wasn't fighting for glory. He wasn't fighting for dominance. He was fighting to understand, to find a new purpose. Without a word, Zorkin took a step forward, not with the intention to attack, but to challenge, to learn. His heart, once filled with pride and arrogance, now beat with a different rhythm. The warrior was ready to fight for something beyond himself, ready to embrace a strength he had never known. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, and for the first time, Zorkin saw a glimmer of respect in the human's eyes. This wasn't just about physical strength anymore. It was about something deeper, and Zorkin was ready to learn it. Zorkin stood before the human, a silent storm raging within him. The battlefield, once filled with the sounds of clashing weapons and the fury of combat, now felt distant, almost irrelevant. The only thing that mattered now was the decision that lay heavy on his heart. For the first time in his life, Zorkin was faced with a choice, not one of victory or defeat, but one of change. The human had shown him something he had never known, a different kind of strength, a strength born from will, from resilience, from fighting for others rather than conquering them. The warrior looked down at his hands, the same hands that had taken countless lives, the same hands that had crushed civilizations underfoot. His hands were stained, not just with the blood of his enemies, but with the years of pride and arrogance that had defined his existence. Every battle he had won, every planet he had conquered, had only left him more hollow. He had searched for meaning in domination, in power, but all he had found was emptiness. And now, standing before this human, Zorkin realized that true strength wasn't in power at all. It was in purpose. The human watched him, not with contempt, but with quiet understanding. He had offered Zorkin a path, a chance to find something greater than the endless cycle of war and bloodshed. It wasn't just about defeating enemies anymore. It was about protecting those who needed it, about standing up for something worth fighting for. Could Zorkin truly change? Could he give up the life he had known for so long and embrace this new way of thinking? The very idea was terrifying, and yet it felt right. Zorkin's heart pounded in his chest as he made his choice. With a sudden movement, he dropped his weapon to the ground, the heavy hilt thudding against the dirt. The sound echoed across the battlefield, a symbol of surrender, not to the human, but to himself. For the first time, Zorkin was choosing to lay down his power, his strength, in search of something more meaningful. The human stepped forward, his expression softening, though there was no surprise in his eyes. He had known that Zorkin's decision wasn't going to be easy, that the warrior had spent a lifetime learning to wield power, not compassion. But the human had also seen something in Zorkin, a flicker of hope, a spark of possibility. "I never thought I'd see the day," the human said quietly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "But I'm glad I did." Zorkin met his gaze, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what lies ahead, but I'm willing to try. To fight for something different." The human nodded. "You don't have to fight alone. There are others who believe in this kind of strength, and you'll find your place among them." For a moment, the two stood in silence, the weight of the decision settling over them both. Zorkin didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he could truly change, if he could ever be the protector he now aspired to be. But as he stood there, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, he knew that for the first time in his life, he had made a choice that wasn't driven by pride or the thirst for power. It was driven by something else, something more human. With a deep breath, Zorkin turned away from the battlefield, his massive frame casting a long shadow as he walked beside the human. The warrior no longer felt the need to conquer. Instead, he felt something new, a strange sense of hope, of possibility. As they walked away from the destruction behind them, Zorkin glanced at the human. "You've shown me something I never knew existed," he said, his voice full of quiet gratitude. "I don't know if I'll ever be as strong as you, but I'm willing to try." The human smiled, his eyes filled with a warmth that Zorkin had never seen before. "Strength isn't just about what you can do. It's about who you fight for." Zorkin nodded slowly. The words settled deep within him, planting seeds of change that would grow over time. The warrior had been through countless battles, but this was different. This battle wasn't fought with weapons, with strength, or with the will to destroy. It was fought with the heart, with the desire to protect, to fight for something greater than oneself. And for the first time in his life, Zorkin understood what it truly meant to be strong. This final part concludes Zorkin's transformation. He abandons his old ways, symbolized by dropping his weapon, and chooses a new path, one driven by purpose and the desire to protect. The human's influence has changed him, and Zorkin is now ready to fight for something more meaningful than power or conquest. The story ends with a sense of hope and possibility for the future, as Zorkin embarks on a new journey, no longer defined by his past, but by the strength of his heart. Let me know if you'd like any revisions, or if you want help with anything else.